Hi, welcome back to the channel. In today's episode, I want to talk to you about what could turn out to be one of the most significant developments that we've seen so far in the war in Iran, because the United States has launched strikes on Kharg Island, the small island in the Persian Gulf that handles the vast majority of Iran's oil exports. According to information that's emerged so far, the USA has targeted military facilities on the island, including air defense systems, naval installations, and airport infrastructure. But the key point here is this: Kharg Island is where roughly 90% of Iran's oil exports leave the country, and most of that oil is shipped directly to China, which has become the largest buyer of Iranian crude. So even though the oil infrastructure itself has not yet been hit, the war in Iran has now moved right up to the doorstep of Iran's most important economic lifeline. And that is why this development could potentially be the single biggest escalation that we've seen so far in terms of the potential impact on the oil market and the global economy. Because once a conflict starts moving into energy infrastructure, things can escalate very quickly. So in today's video, we'll discuss exactly what Kharg Island is, why it's so important to Iran, why it had previously been avoided as a target, what the United States is looking to achieve by striking it now, and how Iran has threatened to respond, and why this could potentially send oil prices sharply higher when markets reopen. Kharg Island sits around 16 miles off the Iranian coast in the Persian Gulf, and for decades it's been the main hub for Iran's oil exports. The facilities on the island were actually developed in the 1960s by the American oil company Amoco, when Iran was still closely aligned with the United States. However, following the Iranian Revolution in 1979, those assets were nationalized by the Iranian government and have remained under state control ever since. Today, the island contains large oil storage tanks, export terminals, and loading facilities capable of filling some of the largest oil tankers in the world. It's very deep water. And because of that infrastructure, Kark has become the central artery of Iran's oil export system. Around 1.5 million barrels of oil per day currently leave the island, which means that this single location plays an absolutely critical role in Iran's economy. Now, as I mentioned earlier, a large proportion of that oil ends up in China, which has become the largest customer for Iranian crude, despite the extensive sanctions in place against Iranian oil. So if anything were to happen to the facilities on Kharg Island, the impact on Iran's economy could be extremely significant, because Iran still relies heavily on the energy sector. Oil and gas activity accounts for roughly a quarter of Iran's economic output by some estimates, and it provides a critical source of government revenue, which means Kharg Island is not just another strategic location. It is effectively the heart of Iran's oil economy and also its general economy. Up until this point, both the United States and Israel appear to have deliberately avoided targeting Kharg Island directly, and the reason for that is fairly obvious. Attacking the main oil export hub of a major producer could trigger a major global energy shock. Analysts have previously warned that if Kharg Island was taken offline, it would remove well over 1 million barrels of oil per day from the global supply, could be as much as 1.5. And at a time when global energy markets are already tight, that kind of disruption will drive prices sharply higher. So up until now, the strategy appears to have been apply military pressure on Iran without triggering a full-scale war on oil infrastructure. But that line has now been crossed. The decision by the United States to strike Kharg Island, even if it's only the military facilities, appears to be a deliberate escalation of economic pressure on Iran. One interpretation is that the United States is trying to accelerate to the end of the war by targeting assets that are strategically important to the Iranian economy. In other words, rather than allowing the conflict to drag on, the strategy may be to increase economic pressure quickly and dramatically. By threatening the infrastructure that generates the revenue the Iranian government relies upon, if Kharg Island becomes vulnerable, Iran faces the risk that its main export route for oil could be disrupted or even shut down entirely, and that would hit the government finances very hard. However, there is also a flip side to this strategy, because Iran has now made it clear that if its own energy infrastructure is targeted, it will retaliate by attacking American-linked oil facilities across the Middle East. In other words, Iran could now attempt to raise the economic cost for the United States and its allies by pushing global oil prices dramatically higher. And that's where this situation becomes extremely dangerous. Because if oil infrastructure across the region starts being targeted, then this conflict could quickly evolve into a full-scale war on oil. Iran has now come out and said, as a result of the attack on Kharg Island, there is a genuine risk to American-linked oil facilities in the Middle East, and that could potentially include energy facilities in neighbouring countries where American companies operate or where US forces are present. And the objective of that strategy would be very clear: to create maximum disruption to global energy supplies. Iran has warned that in such a scenario, oil prices could surge to more than $200 per barrel. And if that were to happen, the consequences would be felt across the whole of the global economy, because oil is still one of the most important commodities in the world. Higher oil prices increase transport costs, production costs, and inflation. And historically, major oil shocks have often been followed by economic slowdowns or global recessions. Another very concerning development is that the United States is now moving Marines into the region. The US Navy has deployed the amphibious assault ship USS Tripoli along with a Marine Expedition Unit, which includes around 2,000 Marines. And depending on how many of the amphibious group joins them, it could be up to 5,000 Marines heading to the region over the next week or two. Now, there's been no official confirmation that the United States plans to carry out any land invasion, but it is worth noting that Kharg Island is a relatively small island located offshore, which means that if the United States wanted to put boots on the ground in Iran, Kark would be one of the more geographically feasible locations. So while that remains speculation at this stage, the movement of amphibious forces into the region certainly creates that possibility. The reason this situation is so important is because global oil markets are extremely sensitive to geopolitical disruptions, and Kharg Island sits right at the centre of one of the world's most important energy regions. Even before this development, oil prices had already climbed above $100 per barrel, from $60 at the start of this year. If traders begin to believe that Iran's exports could be disrupted, or that regional oil infrastructure could come under attack, prices will rise significantly further. And the timing here is also very interesting, because these developments are happening over the weekend when oil markets are closed. So we won't really know the market reaction until trading resumes on Monday. But there is clearly a possibility that the markets could react strongly, because investors will now have to price in the risk that this conflict could escalate into a much wider disruption on global energy supplies. So the summary of today's video is that the United States has now launched strikes on Kharg Island, the location responsible for the vast majority of Iran's oil exports. Although the oil infrastructure itself has not yet been targeted, the war in Iran has moved right up against the centre of Iran's oil economy. Iran has responded by warning that it may retaliate against American-linked oil facilities across the Middle East, which raises the risk that this conflict could escalate into a broader war involving global energy infrastructure. And if that happens, oil prices will rise sharply, potentially far beyond the levels that we've seen so far, which means that this could turn out to be one of the most important developments in the war in Iran so far. Because this news has broken over the weekend, we don't really know the full market reaction until oil trading resumes on Monday, but there is clearly a risk that oil prices could jump significantly higher when markets reopen. So I'll keep you posted on any further news and developments as and when they happen, but hopefully you found today's video useful, informative, and most importantly, thought-provoking. I'm trying to provoke some thoughts, get you thinking about what the implications of what's happening thousands of miles away from where you live could actually be on your household budget. That's the bottom line here. So if you've liked what I've said today, then please give me a thumbs up. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Don't forget, I'm currently running my competition where you can win my property or a cash prize. I've actually got some really exciting offers on the go at the moment. So if you'd like to have a look at that, please scan the QR code on the screen now or click the link in the description below. Thank you so much to everyone that's supported me in other ways. If you've bought me a coffee or sent me a YouTube super thanks, thank you so much for that generosity. It really means a lot to me. And if you've signed up as a patron or a member, then that really helps to keep me going long term. It just helps me think up more ideas and more things to do with the channel. So thank you so much for that long-term support. And here's something to put a smile on your face.